Paul Henn, Director of Learning Services from Ulm Public Schools, will be our first educator. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's our pleasure for sure. Paul's been a friend of the Learning Council for many, many years, so we're excited to hear what he has to say and what's occurring over there in his district.
Does that look right?
Looks perfect.
You know, you'd think we'd probably get used to some of this after a little while, everyone. It's been it's been certainly a full year and a challenging year, and we've been down the road of Google Meets and different slide shares and Zooms, and here we are at a year later. And I appreciate the Learning Council for having me back out. I've had a chance to talk a couple of times about different topics and different issues with the learning that we've been facing. Just for context, it was last fall, so not even this past fall, but the fall before, that I had my first experience with the Learning Council at an event in St. Paul. Had a chance to come out and talk about some of the things that we were doing down in New Ulm. We were just starting our one-to-one deployment with a lot of our kids, and we were getting into these conversations about some of our partnerships that we've had with personalized learning, and some of the different tools that we were integrating as we were going through this process of really shifting our mindset to becoming a personalized learning district for all of our students. And it was a great event. It was a great conversation. Had a chance to meet a lot of really great people. And then as we moved into the spring, I was getting set to come back for their St. Paul event last spring, and all of this happened. And it kind of changed the scope a little bit of what we wanted to do. It created certainly some challenges for us, being only about 3/4 of a year into our one-to-one, really starting with some different types of content, types of tools. And we had a lot of things to figure out in a really short amount of time, just like everybody else. Regardless of what region you're in, it certainly changed the face of what we had to do and what we had to in front of us. With the caveat that we all had the ability now to, as we were doing this, start to really make some assessments of short and long-term need as far as a lot of our tools and contents go. So I want to talk a little bit today about how we created a mix of curricular content and resources to try to meet some of the challenges of all learning models for all learners. And again, just to provide some brief context for this, this isn't limited to, and I know that many districts are probably having similar conversations right now. This isn't meant to be limited to just however long the COVID era lasts. These are certainly things that we found both in the short term and for the long term, hopefully items that work, that kind of meet the changing needs of learners in some of these different environments that we are now more and more comfortable providing for our learners. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we did that mix. I'm going to give you some background on how we got there and where this came from. And then certainly we have hopefully have time in the end for any questions from anybody. So some of the challenges that we've been facing, and I know everybody out there has probably experienced a lot of the same things. And these are the challenges that really led to us to think about things in a little bit different way. When we go back to last spring, when it was essentially distance learning across the board for the last 3 months in Minnesota, and certainly in many other regions had kind of the same thing, we found that as we went through that, there were going to be some different challenges that we had as we started to think about what learning model is best. What is this going to look like at the start of the 2021 school year? So from that stretch forward, not only were we having conversations about how we can serve the kids right now, but we certainly kind of had to plan forward and try to figure out what it is that we were going to do throughout the whole course of this current school year. So some of the challenges that we really had with that, we all know that we've had student engagement challenges. Much of it can stem from some of the attendance pieces. Attendance has been a challenge for whatever reason, as far as engaging kids, engaging families. We know that there's been the social emotional health, learning loss. There's probably a lot of conversation going on about learning loss right now. When we started out this fall, we knew we were going to have a little bit different baseline than what we've had in the past. And we needed to assess that so we kind of knew what we were facing moving forward. We've been very fortunate in our district that we've been face to face for the vast majority of the year. We've had one stretch of distance learning between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and outside of that, we've been able to really have our kids in the building. We had a little stretch in one of our buildings with some hybrid learning. But the idea behind some of the work that we've done is, how do we create a better infrastructure, a better mix within our curriculum, so that regardless of learning model, and especially in the sense that some of this is going to change the way we can, or some possibilities that we have in being able to deliver to learners, especially considering that we've had various degrees of success and challenge as we've gone through this. And how do we do that without continuing to tax our staff? That's been one of the biggest things that we've had, is we've tried to continue to move forward with the different things that we were doing. Staff, though, was facing kids in class. All of them also had some distance learners. Some of those situations we had hybrid learners. We've had kids in and out for different reasons, quarantines. The Q word has kind of become something we all dread hearing, when you have to quarantine that class and figure out what that learning is going to look like. So we had a lot of challenges, just like everybody else, that we were going to face. And we've really tried to focus in on what are some long-term solutions to make things work for learners within our district. We also had a lot of the same equity challenges that people had. Access within our community. Not everybody had, to an equal degree, the same level of access. We've been fortunate to find partners, like many have, but that was certainly a challenge. The communications with our families, engaging our families, and being, also agents of helping us deliver that learning and go through that. That's been a challenge for a lot of our families, especially when we get into those quarantine situations, or we've been in those distance learning situations. All of those issues have been something that we've kind of had to work through and try to figure out as we've kind of been building the ship as we go here, so to say. And then certainly some of the challenges with the health and safety pieces. It's impacted kids that we've been able to get back into our buildings. We still have distance learners out there, or learners that have kind of gone back and forth. We've had the kids that have been quarantined due to close contacts. All of those variables have certainly created some different challenges that we've needed to address as we've gone through. So with all that said, here's kind of what we found. And I'm going to go back to what we were talking about in the first slide with learning loss. One of the things that we really felt like we had to do was we had to get down to the root cause of, here's where our kids re-baseline when we got to our fall diagnostic testing. How is it that we're able to then address what those real issues are? And what we found is it wasn't so much learning loss. All of our data seemed to indicate that we were able to really keep our head above water and maintain the learning that we had up to the point last spring when we had to go to distance learning. And that we felt like was a pretty big positive for us when we got to the fall. But the bigger challenge was that we quickly started to realize that although we were able to maintain the learning that had occurred, that there was a lot of lost opportunity for learning that we were going to have to backfill as we kind of moved through this process. And this is really where the work and the tech tools and the different avenues we did to create a little bit better mix within our curriculum was really needed in order to help us moving forward. Because it's certainly a much different problem dealing with learning loss where learning has occurred and trying to backfill learning that had never happened. And the loss of opportunity for learning wasn't just limited to those distance learning pieces or times that we didn't have kids in front of us. We still had the same synchronous, asynchronous learning opportunities. But, as we made these changes to accommodate all of the different health and safety needs, that involved changes in schedules, that involved changes in, how we structure our day. So even though we had kids in person, we were still cutting back instructional time, to accommodate different needs for prepping for distance learners that were joining synchronously in our classes. We were building those capacities. We had to do more on kind of some of that prep side to be able to make this all work. And what kind of was cut out as a result of that was some of that instructional time. So we're making up for a lot of lost opportunity for learning, even as we've gone through this year, whether it was face-to-face, whether it was hybrid learning, whether it was a distance learning model. So we're a district that's worked a lot with a group called Educational Elements. We've worked with them on our personalized learning solutions, and it's been a wonderful partnership that we've had with them. But one of the things I had to do was turn to them for more. Now, how do we approach this through a curricular point of view? And one of the things they were able to share with me was kind of starting to shift that mindset from that traditional view of, well, we're building that personalized learning environment, how we use our technology tools and resources and content in a more modernized way. And if you kind of look at the traditional way of how we do that, when we first were into our one-to-one environment, a lot of it was just looked at as what's online and what's offline. And it became something that leaned heavily on kind of real foundational tools that we had within our curriculum already, plus productivity heavy tools. So as we started that integration, it was a lot about, how do we get kids to complete tasks versus how do we make sure that we're extending some of those learning opportunities for our students and deepening that level of learning. So we moved away with some of our learners, especially some of our early learners here, which is where a lot of this work has had to be focused on to start this year, from that online versus offline piece, where much of the integration was, how do we share and submit assignments? How do we do those productivity things? And trying to remember with everybody that productivity doesn't necessarily equal deeper learning. And that dependency on some of those productivity tools takes away from those opportunities that we have to mix in some different tools and resources and pieces that really have the potential to extend learning. So our mix was a little bit out of balance. And what we tried to do then was take a new modern look at how our curricular resources and content can fit in a little bit different space. And what we started working with then with our Ed Elements group was, let's break this online, offline out into foundational, adaptive, and highly customizable content, both with online and offline components. And what we found as we started to look at this was the space for adaptive content was a place where we were very weak. It was also a place where we had a lot of solutions to make up for some of that lost learning, because it provided material for us that adapted to the kids as they went. And that was the space that we really started to focus in on, was how do we get more of this great adaptive content that uses all of this great artificial intelligence and leverage that to help our kids on all ends of the spectrum, from kids that need intervention to kids that need those enrichment opportunities and really need to be able to run. How do we make more room for that type of space? And it allowed us to get into a lot of great different partnerships with a lot of great different groups, and really start to find a balance of what does this really look like for the extension of learning versus just being able to produce and accomplish tasks, which is kind of the old view of how we were approaching some of that. So what did we find as far as results? Well, first of all, we were able to open up greater access for families, learners, and staff, and that was really priority one. We wanted to make sure that regardless of mode, we were able to move learning forward with our kids and deliver some of this new adaptive content as we went through, the kids were able to access that families were able to access that without a lot of hurdles to jump through. And one of the great things about all of the different tools and adaptive contexts that are out there, whether it's an Achieve 3000, whether it's an Amplify Reading, which is the direction we went, to Dreambox Learning, all of these different components, the easier we can make it for families and learners, the more likely it is to be used. And it takes a lot of those workflow pieces off of staff, because staff no longer has to create that content all of the time to try to meet all of those different needs and try to make up for all of that different lost learning that we've had. It also, and this is one of the bigger things, is it reconnected that formative feedback loop. One of the things that these tools do very well with is create a formative assessment loop that allows everybody, from teacher to student, to get instant feedback. Now, on the instructional side, that really helps our teachers understand what are those targets that we need to hit or that we need to go back and review. Does it need to be a whole group review? Can I target that with specific groups? But more importantly, for kids and families, when they're at home and they're using these tools in that distance learning model, they're getting feedback without always having to have a staff member there to give it to them. And it's really good feedback and high quality feedback. And it's taken a lot of that stress off of our families, off of our learners and our staff. So, the results that we've had by creating this mix has been really positive. Positive enough that I felt like it was really important to kind of share, what that's looked like for us, and the results that we've been getting, and really how you can leverage this, or things like this, into any long-term planning that you have. Because one of the hardest things that we do as we work with our staff, we know, is building in that differentiation. And what if we can get some of that differentiation, especially at that classroom tier, where kids, either need to have those enrichment opportunities or have some of those intervention opportunities. How do we leverage all of these tools and make that work in a little bit more efficient way, where we're collecting data and really understanding how it is our kids are doing. So we feel like it's been a successful thing for us. And I know that as you all go through different pieces of your curriculums, that having that mix will become really, really important as we move forward, because it really helps us hit all modes of learning, whether it's in person, whether it's distance learning, whether it's hybrid learning. And it really does take some of that that workload off of our families, off of our kids, and off of our staff. So that's what I have for everybody today, and I certainly want to leave some time here for questions.
Paul, that's awesome. You guys are doing some really good work. I don't see any questions in chat or the Q&A, but I have a couple myself, of course.
Sure.
Let's say you could step back in time and go pre-last March, knowing what you know now. What are maybe one or two things you wish you would have had in place before everything, quote unquote, shut down, that would have made the whole transition to hybrid or completely, kids off the school grounds learning, made it easier for everybody?
One of the big things, since we were just getting into our one-to-one, I think everybody understands that, as you move into an environment like that in your district, a lot of the conversation starts out surrounding, what, are we going to use iPads? Are we going to use Chromebooks? Are we going to lease? Are we going to buy? And all of that discussion really revolves around the device. And I think what gets lost in that discussion is those things that really make that device a learning tool, those software pieces, those curricular content pieces. And again, I think if I could go back, I wish we could have transitioned out of that device conversation and really surrounded that with, okay, what is it that fits the learning that we want to accomplish? And having really clear goals on, here are the learning pieces we want to make sure come about as we're putting this one-to-one into place. And having those, I think, really would have driven then some of that direction of, here are some adaptive tools that we can use. Here are some things that we can take off of our staff if we move this direction. It's a conversation that we had planned on getting to, and then everything kind of came to a grinding halt, and all of a sudden we realized, oh, we really need to get to this. So if I could go back and do anything, it would be that conversation. Really, what are those drivers that make the device go versus all of the different device options, payment options, those types of things that we have to talk about up front, getting that conversation faster.
Awesome. I like that a lot. How are the teachers? How are the kids doing?
One of the hardest things about this past year has been, they've been asked to do so much. Our families have been asked to do a ton. Our kids have been asked to do a ton. Our teachers have been asked to do a ton. So we had to be really, really careful when we brought in different tools. And I remember having this conversation now back in October when we decided to make one of these infusions of help with our reading and get something in there that we knew would be good for kids. The immediate pushback was, well, we can't take on anything new. Once we helped our staff understand that this adaptive content is taking that workflow off of you versus putting it on you, and really now all we have to do is help kids get logged in and get them comfortable getting logged in, and then they just go. And then we look at that data and we use that data, and it's all made for us. There's nothing in there that had to be created by any of our staff. We had to share the login QR, and everybody was moving. I think that really helped change some of that conversation and helped people really understand the value of how, when we get outside of those productivity suites and really look at those dynamic learning tools, how that changes the face of what we're doing.
Cool. I like that. It looks like our boss joined us, so I'm going to unmute her because she's always got interesting questions.
Hey, good to join you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, Minnesota, I always get so excited about Minnesota. It's my home state. I grew up there. I get super excited. And you're one of our Edu Jedi award winners. You have Edu Jedi rank. That's a pretty big deal. So, really in Minnesota, you sometimes have to have snow days, and sometimes other weird stuff happens too, right? But then with the pandemic, it probably wildly altered your use of time and space, which is of heavy interest right now to the Learning Council from a research perspective, because we're dabbling in how logistics really should work. How you sort of, like most districts, they have this pacing guide thing going on over here, which is a document or a PDF or a Google Doc or a spreadsheet. And then over here is their calendar schedule. And it's kind of wild. It's like, okay, teacher number one, you got this many minutes on Mondays, Tuesdays, and only Fridays. But then the next week it's Wednesdays and Thursdays. And it's like, I don't know how they deal with it, and no technology seems to be addressing this issue. So really, what happened with your time space continuum thing as an Edu Jedi during the pandemic?
You know what? It evolved. And I remember having this conversation, getting to be one of your national panelists for this discussion. And even since that discussion, things have really changed as far as how we use especially our time. Space gets to be a little bit more of a long-term adaptation. Now, we've had to do that but most of it has been a step backwards because of safety protocol versus a step forward in how we can
Yeah.
continue to evolve and how we use our space. But from a time perspective, again, time isn't just instructional time. It's also that instructional preparation time.
Yeah.
And the more of that time we can save our staff from having to take up by always having to prepare things has benefited the overall teaching and learning product, because it gives them a chance to focus in on the teaching. Here's my data. It's already ready for me. I can identify which kids have which needs. And now we can move forward with targeting what are those needs and how do we need to deliver that. And to me, from that use of time, where we've been able to do that, especially in some of our early reading, that's where we've seen the greatest growth so far, from fall to today. And it's all about just kind of finding that right a mix of content and tools together that fit those learning goals and those learning needs. And that's why it's great to have so many different tools available, because you can really, each tool kind of targets a different need. And I'll use reading as an example, especially in the area of reading. If you're looking for something to target something specific, you will be able to find it, and not only find it in some static content, but also some greatly adaptive content for your learners. And that is so, so valuable.
Yeah, it's what you just said. There was a lot more to it than the way, that you said it. You said it fairly simple, but the depth, if we went into every nook and cranny of what you just said, it's huge. It is so huge. All right, cool. All right. So, Paul, as always, great to see you. If I come up there this summer, I'm going to swing by and wave.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I hate taking that little tiny plane from Minneapolis up to Bemidji. It scares me. So I always drive. So, yeah. I have to swing by.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and thank you to everybody. This is always really good information, and to those participating today, you're going to get a lot of good stuff, and just figuring out how to put it all together in the long term here is going to be so important, because we've seen many positives through the last year. Not that we haven't had challenges, we've all had the challenges, but certainly this has helped frame some of the positives that can happen when we have the right tools and content available to be able to do those things.
Good. I hope you get back on or stay on for when I'm going to talk about hybrid logistics. So that'll be interesting. So thank you. And thanks to your fabulous district, our big, hello to everyone over there. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Google's G Suite and Chromebook one-to-one programs are revolutionizing education like never before. But despite many benefits for teachers, schools, and students, most schools are falling short of their implementation initiatives due to a lack of effective professional development. But how do you effectively cater to teachers with different technological skill levels, learning styles, and schedules? Designed specifically for Google use in K-12, MobileMind solves these challenges by developing the modern professional learning hub for schools that is personalized, practical, and incredibly convenient for educators. Unlike traditional professional development, MobileMind is cloud-based, so teachers are able to learn at their own pace whenever they have time in their schedule right from our Chrome extension. And since content is broken down into micro-courses with practical applications, progress can be made minutes at a time instead of committing to hours per session. MobileMind is tailored for individual users, accounting for skill level and previous knowledge to challenge each educator appropriately. Learners demonstrate competency by completing performance-based Google challenges and receive ongoing individualized feedback from MobileMind's team of certified educators. Finally, MobileMind's data and reporting allows teachers to view their individual progress while providing schools and district leaders with the key metrics they need to evaluate the impact of virtual professional development throughout their district. MobileMind's combination of cloud-based learning and tailored microcourses results in an average increase of 362% in the use of Google in educators' day-to-day teaching. Visit us at mobilemind.io and request a consultation and demonstration of our innovative professional learning solution.